Hi, Truth of the Matter listeners. I'm Navin Girishankar, president of the CSIS Economic Security and Technology Department and the host of CSIS's newest podcast, Betting on America, where we explore the global technology race and what it'll take for the United States to come out on top. Join me as I sit down with leaders from business and government to understand the risks and the rewards of investing in the technologies and industries of the future in a community near you. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts to learn how and why we are betting on America.
I'm Andrew Schwartz, and you're listening to The Truth of the Matter, a podcast by CSIS where we break down the top policy issues of the day and talk with the people that can help us best understand what's really going on.
To get to the truth of the matter and to understand what's going on with U.S. leadership in artificial intelligence, and in particular on the energy side of it, we have with us two of my absolute favorite colleagues at CSIS. We have Navin Girishankar, who is president of our Economic Security and Technology Department, and we have with us Joseph Majkut, who is head of our Energy Security and Climate Change Program. Guys, welcome to the podcast. I've never had both of you on at the same time. This is totally exciting.
Thank you for having us. Look forward to the conversation.
Guys, can you tell me about the report you recently released, Securing Full Stack U.S. Leadership in AI? What does full stack leadership actually mean?
Let me kick off and hand over to Joseph, who did a lot of the work with the team. When you think AI leadership, oftentimes people think about frontier models. But what we've done here is lay out what the key components are to achieve AI leadership. That's frontier models, data centers and the chips, the leading edge chips that go into them, the energy sources that are needed to power those data centers, and digital networks. So all of these together form the full stack of AI leadership and what you need to achieve leadership across AI. And so any one of these is a point of failure. And I think one of the sort of central messages that I know Joseph is going to go into is that while AI is digital in nature, the binding constraint is physical, and in particular, the energy component of that AI stack.
We've looked at this problem and we kind of wanted to know what is going on. We see incredible investments coming from the private sector into leading edge chips, into the software and data that underlie large AI models, into data centers around the country. And part of what we wanted to do with this study, as Navin said, was identify across all of these enabling factors where there might be friction points as the US is making investments in AI leadership, and making sure that we identify for those friction points policy recommendations that can help secure long-term US leadership. This is a transformative technology. We're not quite sure how it's going to affect the economy going forward, but every indication is that it's a very, very significant component of economic competition.
Okay, so you both worked on this report. What should we know about the U.S. status in the AI race with its competitors?
I think there's a couple things that we can highlight. Thus far, the US has really been in the lead in creating the best models, the so-called frontier models. We are in the lead in deploying GPUs. We've got almost 3 times as many advanced GPUs deployed here in the US. Much more compute capacity is what AI experts call it. And those advantages have meant we've got not just like kind of one great model, but multiple companies creating models and trying to find entry for these tools into the economy. That's a really strong leadership position. We want to make sure that that's maintained.
Navin, I want you to weigh in on this too, because you spend a lot of time thinking about U.S. competitiveness. You've worked in industry, you've worked in government. Most recently, you were a senior advisor to the Deputy Secretary of Commerce. What's the story here in your view?
I think it's the message that I took from my time in investing that rings true here, which is that if you're standing still, you're going to fall behind. In fact, I would say if you're not moving faster than your competitors, you're going to fall behind. And when I think of AI, I think of not only the approach to AI development, meaning the development of frontier models, which we know is something that is a race that is accelerating, and the DeepSeek open source breakthrough in China is just a reminder of that we need to be on our tippy toes and move very, very quickly. But then when you look at these other elements of the AI stack, we're also facing fierce competition. Let's just take energy, for example. We know that the Chinese are significantly expanding their power sector. They're developing domestic AI chips. They're trying to. And so they're already moving. The French aim to leverage surplus nuclear capacity to attract investment in data centers. The Japanese are trying to use idle nuclear plants really to, again, attract data centers. And the UAE is doing something similar with AI zones that would be nuclear powered. Everybody is chasing this thing. And so again, it goes back to that thing. If you're not moving as fast or faster than the others, you will fall behind. And so what today is a snapshot and looks like us being far ahead can change very, very quickly. And we need basically an it's already too late strategy.
So now you just mentioned it, but energy is a real critical factor to AI that I think most people are now starting to understand how big of a factor is. Joseph, can you put that into perspective a bit?
Sure. So as we look at the generative AI industry growing, the unit of measure is data centers in the gigawatts. Now, a gigawatt is a unit of power generation. And the right way to think about it is 1 gigawatt is about what we get out of the Hoover Dam. So we're now casually talking about data centers being deployed in the US at 2 gigawatts, up to 5 gigawatts. And like I said before, we've got multiple labs building these things. So we're going to have a fleet of them. Our own estimates show we need 40 to 80 gigawatts of new data centers for AI in the coming years. That's 40 large nuclear reactors at least. That's 40 Hoover dams at least in terms of power generation. So where are we going to get that from? How are we going to make sure we can build all that power affordably? And critically, in one of the underlying papers from this study, how do we make sure that data centers, which can be built quickly, how can we reduce the time it takes to build power to run these big, large data centers?
Your new publication states that the United States leads the world in generative AI. How is this an advantage and can it be a drawback?
Our thinking is that there will be immense economic, scientific, national security, and strategic benefits from being at the forefront of AI. Even on the economics, that's why we're seeing such massive investments from the hyperscaling companies. We looked at a couple examples in this report. It's like because we're talking about investment in, approaching $2 trillion over the next 5 years. But if you look at, okay, well, how is this stuff going to get used in the economy? Can the companies even afford this? There's a couple examples in the paper I think are really interesting. The first says, well, if you're able to improve software engineering productivity by 40%, right? These tools are super good at writing code. They're supercharging our ability of gifted programmers to write code themselves. The amount that we were expecting to pay on software engineering with such a productivity increase, you basically could pay for all the depreciation and interest on the capital expenditure to build as many data centers as we're going to be able to build. That tells you, that's one isolated example. That's before you get to any of the really fascinating, interesting economic stories about this improving medicine, law practice, entering various sectors of the economy.
Basic research as well, manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, material sciences. The list goes on, where we could reap significant benefits in terms of productivity, importantly, innovation. And our ability to lead on this allows us, importantly, to set the rules of the game for how AI-enabled services and AI-enabled exports will allow us to lead the world. And this is what Vice President Mance was talking about when he said that AI leadership by the US is what they're trying to achieve. So it will benefit, other countries as well, which would be export markets. And so this is a case that has been made. I think the value added of this piece is to say, okay, now let's break down the pieces that we need to lead. And are we leading in each of these areas? Now, there are lots of numbers that are thrown around everywhere. And I got to tip my hat to Joseph and his team for what they did, which is they said, okay, there is no one answer. Let's think of scenarios and let's be really thoughtful about trying to quantify what those scenarios are for chips, for energy, the different components, for capital. And so when you look at the report, they have some medium, high, and low case, and they really laid this out very well with historical stress testing. And I really found it quite valuable in terms of really just being common sense about how we think about these aggregate numbers.
Yeah, and if I may, part of what we thought was an important element of this research, Andrew, was to really stress test, as Navin says, the numbers you see flying around. Because, big tech companies, they perceive themselves in a big existential race toward artificial general intelligence, and they have very, very optimistic views about these technologies. A lot of people looking from the outside go, well, is this a bubble? Are we really going to make money in these technologies? And so one of the things I'm most proud about is we took a really clear-eyed view across different scenarios. One of the findings is across all of those scenarios, even if we are in a bubble, a fervor of investment right now that will fade shortly, the number of data centers that we're going to build is still fairly significant and still going to challenge, particularly on the energy side, our ability to build fast enough and to make sure that we don't cause problems in other parts of the energy sector while we do that.
So maybe a drawback, if there is a drawback, because I asked you this question: is there a drawback to being the leader in AI, which is counterintuitive? Maybe the drawback is that this takes an enormous amount of energy, enormous amount of resources, and something we really need to be aware of. Is that right?
I think that's one of the ones that we're able to most directly understand right now. There's lots of interesting conversations out there about labor dislocation and other economic effects of AI. Pause that for a moment. The energy issues are quite, I wouldn't say insurmountable, but they are challenging, right? We have, for the last 20 years, had a fairly low growth rate in our power sector. And that is now changing. And AI is one of the key drivers. And there's two principal concerns that come along with this. The first is that to build new power infrastructure, you need to create new generation, you need to improve transmission and distribution infrastructure, and that costs money. And so one of the challenges could be that in growing the power sector to meet all this new demand, a lot of costs get socialized onto other users of the electricity system. Those are called ratepayers. Politicians think of them as voters. And we want to make sure that data centers are not unjustly burdening everybody else. The second thing does relate to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. While that's not a huge priority for this administration, it's a big priority for the companies that are running these large data centers. It's a big priority for lots of states, and it's a big priority for the world. And in that context, making sure that we are diversifying the energy which is used to power these new data centers and continuing to invest in technology innovation so that over the long term, we have a secure and ever cleaner energy system are key policy priorities. That's why energy is a tough thing. The power sector is a very complex beast. A lot of the policy decisions are made at the state level. There's not a lot that the federal government can do. But there are key things it can do with respect to enabling nuclear power, making strategic investments in the grid. That's where a lot of our kind of key findings and recommendations go toward as the administration's thinking about what its strategy for AI leadership is going to be.
So Navin, you think about this a lot. What do we need to see from the US in order to continue to lead on AI?
Well, I think the elements are there or beginning to be there. There's an EO that calls for an action plan by the AI and crypto czar in the White House, which is basically going to be an interagency effort around AI innovation. It's really a pivot away from a focus on safety to really unleashing AI innovation. Both are necessary, but at least there's a potential here for a national game plan, which is really important. Secondly, I think the unleashing energy EO and all the things that Joseph's talked about is a good part of that. The thing I want to hit on is chips. I think it's really important that we do not take our foot off the gas on chips. There was a Chips and Science Act that was bipartisan. I think the president voiced quite strongly opposition, at least to the firm level subsidies that are in the Chips Act, to companies like Intel and Samsung and TSMC. He, I think, has the view that tariffs are the thing that will attract FDI or foreign direct investment in chips. That's a debatable point. I think that the TSMC announcement of $100 billion that happened last week was really important. I think there's a tendency to over-index on the impact of tariffs on that. There's no connection that one can really point to. TSMC was already investing in Arizona. The question for me is, how do we achieve scale and sustain those long-term investments? Secondly, there is a monopsonist situation here where the primary or the only producer of these chips is TSMC, the leading edge chips. There's a benefit in the CHIPS Act to diversifying that pool. In fact, we call for something like an advanced market commitment from hyperscalers to ensure revenue predictability by sourcing chips from Intel and Samsung and TSMC and others. I think that's going to be important to diversify that. The second thing is we cannot take our foot off the pedal on design. We have to lead on design so that we are still at the forefront. I think there's benefit to tax incentives. There's benefits to what's happening under the CHIPS Act on R&D. Those are really important pieces of this. And I just want to underscore that. Remains to be seen, but that's going to be an important piece. Another piece that's really important. I have Senator Todd Young, shameless plug here on accompanying podcast Betting on America, made a great point, which is that he's argued strongly for tech diplomats, technology diplomats. I think we have a foreign commercial service. We have folks in the State Department. We may need to retool this significantly, but if we're going to lead the world on AI, we need to be out front on standards. We need to be out in front on building what is in effect like a long-term relationship, commercial relationship with countries around the world, with US companies working together to actually make an AI offer. And so all the benefits that we talked about just now from AI in the economy here would also be benefits for countries in their economies. You can imagine an AI offer to Kenya, an AI offer to ASEAN countries that include all kinds of applications. And let's not be mistaken. The PRC is beginning to provide such an offer in a turnkey solution that combines digital platforms, data centers, energy, AI applications, and research as a package. We should be at the forefront of that as well. So I would just say that if the administration is going to hit the mark on this, they can't forget chips. They can't forget technology diplomacy. I think they're well on their way in terms of the focus on innovation and the focus on unleashing energy. But this thing needs to come together in a good way.
So, Navin, you just talked about some of the things the administration is going to do or thinking about doing in the form of executive orders. You also mentioned that JD Vance spoke about AI in Paris. What do you expect to see from the administration in terms of its approach to competition in AI in the short term?
Well, I think their emphasis is on innovation or unleashing the power of the US private sector to move, and they believe that they will move faster than others. Now, this is a question that we'll have to investigate and interrogate, particularly as we see breakthroughs with DeepSeek and others. You know, one of the things we're doing, Joseph and other team members are part of that, is to try and understand incentives for technology innovation, including research and AI, applications for AI here in the US, relative to the similar incentives and ecosystems in China. It's not about any one technology. It's about, do we have the underlying incentives for technology innovation relative to our primary competitors? And so one of the things we also argue for in this paper is remember the tech hubs agenda. In other words, let's take that and repurpose it to AI innovation hubs, where we can not only co-locate energy sources, data centers, but also AI hubs that apply AI to particular challenges, whether it's in biotech or other areas like that. And so this is something we can build on with the Tech Hubs agenda. There are 31 tech hubs that are designated across the country. It's a really useful model where local communities and states can lead. They can become the source of our national competitive advantage. And so I think that's sort of one of the things that I would love to see as this strategy evolves and takes shape on the part of the administration. But Joseph, you've been close to this, so you may have some thoughts on that as well.
My lane is energy, where the president has already declared an energy emergency for the US. On the face of it, a lot of people saw that and said, hey, wait, this is crazy. The US is producing more oil and gas than we ever have historically. We're a net exporter. What's going on? And the generous read is we're going to need so much energy to not just maintain leadership on AI, build out the fleet of data centers, which will allow us to do that, but to reshore manufacturing and to help reduce prices. That, you know, the counterfactual is not what is historical energy production, but is what do we want to be using in the future? And they seem very intent on reducing regulatory burdens, cutting red tape, so that we can build enough energy to meet this growing need. I would say that that will be, I'm sure, a key part of the strategy. Then the question is ours, like, how do you navigate the various considerations facing investors and hyperscaling companies and the utilities? How do you protect ratepayers? And how do you make sure you do this in a way that secures long-term success?
Andrew, if I may just jump on this, Joseph pointed out something that's really important. We raised that in the paper. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it. which is the use of strategic public capital in particular areas across the AI stack. And that's like littered through the report, but I just want to call that out so that we're aware of it. In order to make long-term investments, particularly in nuclear power, you need to deploy federal strategic capital given the time horizon of those investments. Similarly, we've talked about that in chips. It doesn't have to take the form of subsidies. It could take the form of tax incentives, but the point is still remains that there is a public finance role to ensure leadership across the AI stack. So I just want to hit that point.
Guys, really appreciate it. The report is called Securing Full Stack U.S. Leadership in AI. It is available at the CSIS website. And Navin, you did a little bit of plug for your podcast, but do it again now because people have got to watch this podcast and listen to it.
Thank you, my friend. Well, with your help, we're launching a podcast called Betting on America, which is focused on what government and business are doing together to make a bet on reindustrialization and technology development across advanced technologies in a community near you, meaning everywhere across the country, where the local becomes the basis for global competitiveness. And we're going to have a number of people from government, from business, from the investment community, really excited about it. Our dual inaugural episode starts tomorrow. It's launched tomorrow with Senator Todd Young and Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy. They're going to be talking about chips and quantum and other such things, and very excited about it.
Great. Guys, really appreciate it. We'll talk to both of you soon.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, sir.
If you enjoyed this podcast, check out our larger suite of CSIS podcasts. From Into Africa, The Asia Chessboard, China Power, AIDS 2020, The Trade Guys, Smart Women, Smart Power, and more. You can listen to them all on major streaming platforms like iTunes and Spotify. Visit csis.org/podcasts to see our full catalog.